Located on the continent of Africa, in the resource-rich country of Zambia, on the edge of the South Luangwa National Park, which comprises over 2.5 million acres, sits a gorgeous glamptuary called Flatdogs Camp. The valley surrounding the camp includes over 100 species of mammals, over 400 species of bird, and over 2,000 types of plants. Flatdogs Camp guests enjoy up-close meetings with these majestic animals, a stay in a gorgeous glamping structure, beautiful on-site amenities, authentic Zambian cuisine, and a world-class staff that attends to your every need. Hi, I'm Bobby Marsden, and welcome to the Glamptuary podcast, where we highlight the experiential outdoor hospitality industry and sustainable lifestyles. In episode 2 of season 3, we sat down with Jessica Salmon, co-owner and director of Flatdogs Camp. We learned about her origins in England, her journey to Africa, and how she helped transform a small town in Zambia into a thriving community through Flatdogs Camp. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Glamptuary podcast. Jessica, so wonderful to have you on the Glamptuary podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's quite exciting.
So we are speaking to you, and you are currently in Zambia, which is very far away from where I am in the United States, which makes this so exciting because I have never visited anywhere in Africa, and it's always been on my bucket list to do a safari. And that's what drew me to your location when I was searching around, trying to find a cool place that is affordable, because I firstly noticed when I was searching for a lot of safaris, I mean, they seem to be very expensive, and yours seem to be very affordable, and we're going to dive into how you're able to make that happen. But before we get to how you ended up in Africa, we should probably talk about where you started, which was in England.
Sure, exactly. Born in England and grew up there, went to school, university there. And then because I studied zoology, I've always been obsessed by animals, and I was always desperate to be with animals, learn about animals, see animals. And I knew once I'd done zoology that Africa would probably be the place for me, and visited during one of my university breaks and hitchhiked around southern Africa with 2 friends, and then completely fell in love with it. The hospitality of the people, the beauty of a lot of the country's scenery that I saw, but also the wildlife, of course, because that was what I was mostly interested in. That's how I sort of veered towards Africa, but with a very English upbringing, as you might be able to hear.
Yeah, no, I noticed the accent for sure. You mentioned you hitchhiked. Now, I would think that hitchhiking might be a little bit different in Africa than it is in England or the United States, because there's very wide open spaces there. Are you hitchhiking on camels? Are you? How did that work? And where did you travel when you were hitchhiking?
You would have had to have been further north to find the camels, but really, it was just the back of buckies. So a bucky is an open pickup truck, I guess. Okay. But in Africa, everyone shares transport and shares lifts, and you pay whatever you can afford to have a ride in the car, because, as you rightly say, distances are so enormous. So we would literally climb on the back of these buckies with a bunch of people we'd never met and start talking and learn more about each other's backgrounds and what people did. And it was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. So that was really what got me hooked on Africa to start with. So, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Whereabouts did you hitchhike? Did it have any relation to Zambia, and that's why you landed there? Or was it somewhere outside of there? And
we started off in Botswana because the friend I was traveling with had been volunteering in a school in one of his breaks. And so he said, well, come to Botswana. It's amazing. Wildlife's incredible. And then we'll hitch from there. And so we hitchhiked from Botswana up through into some amazing areas with wildlife areas. But in those parts, we had to sort of get hold of a real car because you can't sort of walk on your own through the bush. And we borrowed from friends. I think we even hired a car at one point, clubbed together. And then we hitchhiked through Namibia, which is a beautiful country on the west coast, where they filmed that last Mad Max, actually. And it was stunning, really amazing. And then up into Victoria Falls and Zimbabwe. but I just touched through Zambia, never made it into the heart of Zambia. That was for later. So I had already found my place, I thought, but didn't know that there was an even better place waiting ahead.
So you go on this massive hitchhiking trip, you're blown away by Africa, you know this is the place I want to go, but you didn't see Zambia, which is where you ended up. How did you get connected with that?
Well, a few years later, well, 2 years later, I guess, once I qualified, got my degree, and had organized to head back to Namibia and work on a rhino research program there. That was what I was meant to be doing. And then tourism and hospitality sucked me away slightly. But I traveled with two different friends, and we bought a truck in Johannesburg and bought tents and camping equipment and all the rest. And so this time we did the similar sort of route up through Namibia, Botswana, but then into Zambia with our truck. And we were camping all the way as well. It was just a wonderful experience and gave us an idea of what campsites could be like and what people enjoyed or needed and where they wanted to be. And it really helped with the future end up plan as it turned out. Anyway, we got as far as Zambia, and there was a safari show in Lusaka, and I'll never forget. And we just wandered in, and everyone seems to know everyone in small places, especially like Zambia, which is quite a small place. And someone said, "Oh, I've been let down. The girl who was meant to be running my bush camp has not turned up or couldn't come. Can you cook? Like, could you run the camp or something?" And I was like, "Well, I guess. Yes, sounds amazing." He's offering me to live in a bush camp inside the national park for 6 months, and I couldn't say no, really. And that was the start of total fall in love with both hospitality, but also safaris and wildlife viewing and living as close to wild animals as possible while not disturbing them, not affecting them, and not messing with the bush as far as you possibly can. It was beautiful, really totally addicted me then.
So it was kind of like a serendipitous sequence of events that just brought you to Zambia. It's almost maybe like the land was pulling you there in some way, and you were just edging closer as you kept going back to take those African adventures.
Exactly. If there is such a thing as fate, I think that's what happened to me, and forever I'll be grateful that we've had this opportunity, and to be able to see it change over 30 years as well has been incredible. And that, I'm sure we'll get onto it later, but it's one of the reasons why I know that tourism in this sort of unaffecting way of developing tourism and nature, benefiting the local people, making sure everyone's got a benefit to keeping this environment as pristine as possible. I think that's just the ultimate way of being. And Zambia is such an undeveloped country. I think that was why it was so possible here, probably because 30 years ago, certainly, there was almost no safari operations in the country. No one had heard of Zambia. And that's what's so incredible when you see it now, although not very many tourists come to Zambia either, because hardly anyone's heard of Zambia. So it's a work in progress.
Yeah, well, you mentioned 30 years, so that would kind of bring us back into the early 90s. And you got this opportunity to kind of run the operations, it sounds like, at a bush camp. What was the transition for you to take it over? Was it a purchase? How does that work when you're coming from England to purchase land in Africa? Did you get citizenship? It sounds like a lot of things had to fall into place.
Exactly. And I think that being in the right place at the right time was certainly what happened to me and the friends that I met in that time. So I was living in the South Luangwa National Park, where that original bush camp was. And at the end of that season, I volunteered to work at another lodge for a gentleman called Norman Carr. And he was one of the first developers of tourism in Zambia, certainly wildlife tourism. He had been a district officer back in the 40s and had walked on foot through most of Zambia for his job. And he'd found the South Luangwa and decided that the people were so poor, but the wildlife was so rich, that wouldn't it be great to have a joint partnership with the local people make a national park, protect that with the blessing of the people, and create something from that. And that's exactly how it worked. He was an amazing man, a visionary for sure. And then my great friend Jake, who lived in the Luangwa at the time as well, and was running a small campsite, he was leasing some space from another gentleman who owned a crocodile farm. So he was leasing some space so that people could put tents up and things like that. But he was having to pay rent to this guy. And when you're charging sort of $1 per person per night, to pay 50 cents of it to someone else was slightly painful. When he had to buy cars and vehicles to take people on safari, he had to buy all the stuff anyway. So he was looking for a way out, and I was looking for a way in, really, and a good reason to be able to stay, pay my own way, not necessarily have to work for someone else. And it all just fell together at the right place, right time, as I say. And Jake was canny enough to be able to get hold of the land. That's where you originally started the question. And our local chief, because Zambia is interesting in that we have local chiefdoms. Each area has a chief. There is government as well, which is democratically elected here, but the chiefs are the local power sources, and they do local disciplinary matters and things, but they are custodians of the land as well. So the chiefs make it possible for give people a piece of land. We wanted to invest what was basically all our money at the time, so we really wanted to try and get title, which is possible if the chief gives you a letter saying he's allowing you to do so. So basically, we wouldn't be able to do this now, I don't think, but the chief at the time was very forward thinking, and he knew because chiefs are inherited matrilineally in Zambia. So his sister's children were going to inherit the chiefdom, not his children. So he put this piece of land on the river where Flatdogs is now into his name, and then offered to sell it to us, which was very, very nice of him, and how we could be where we are and start this amazing business, and carry on living here in this beautiful place.
That's awesome. That's very different than how things work in the United States. There isn't I guess the equivalent of a chief of a might be the mayor, the governor, but
Yeah,
even in that
yeah.
respect, there's so much red tape that you have to go through and permitting and applications and just a long time
Yes.
frame. What was the time frame like to have the idea and then approach the chief and get him to agree to do this? How long did that take?
Again, it all sort of fell into place because the chief at the time had got title. I can't honestly remember whether Jake had said, "Why don't you?" or whether the chief had decided to do this anyway himself. And I can't remember the order of that. But when it did happen, it was about a year and a half before we started building and started. And there wasn't even that much building because we were mostly aiming for a campsite to make it affordable for people, to make it open up the South Luangwa to people who didn't have like $500 per person per night, which is what the only existing lodges were charging. So that was our other sort of mission, to make it affordable but really good quality and make sure that the local people benefited at every stage.
Yeah, sustainability is so important, and we're certainly going to dive into that in a little bit because definitely want to talk with you about that. But before we do that, you have a name. It's called Flatdogs Camp, and when I was doing my
Yeah.
research, I found out that flat dogs are a nickname for crocodiles.
Yeah.
Is that I'm assuming that's the inspiration for the name because it was. I mean, you tell me how did you guys land on that name?
You're exactly right. Because Jake's first little campsite was on a crocodile farm, and
Oh,
then one of his dogs was eaten by a crocodile. So then we were like, well, I think the name has to stay, Jake. I'm sorry. So but it's also really, really good, easy to remember. It's not like the names of all the other safari camps. I don't know if you've seen many more, but they're often in the local languages. They often don't mean as much to visitors trying to choose a camp. And we thought, well, Flat Dogs Camp, someone's always going to ask why Flat Dogs Camp.
yeah, you're right. When I was searching around for various locations that offered safaris, it was not necessarily a complicated name, but it's not a name that I immediately understood. And it's not
Mm.
really that I understood flat dogs because even in that, it provoke the question, what is that? Which I think, to your point, is good because it opens up a conversation. So you move in there, you have an idea of what you want to do. You have what looks to be some beautiful safari tents. You look to have some beautiful chateaus. You probably started with the safari tents first.
Well, we started almost with nothing first because campsite wise, people would bring their own tents. So we didn't actually have anything set up originally. What Jake did was to build or start building the chateaus or chalets. We sort of call them. It's so weird. It's just a thatch and stone building, but it was slightly more protection for people who didn't have tents. Obviously, you can't sleep on the ground where we are because there's lion, there's elephant, there's other wildlife that may be attracted to you, and so we wanted people to sleep in accommodation if they didn't have their own tent. So he built these 4 buildings which had 2 bedrooms, and they continue to work really well. They're not quite as wild as the tents we have now set up, but over the years, the other joy of starting from the beginning is that it's grown organically as we've evolved, as we've grown, and not moved the goalpost, but seen visionary slightly further in the distance and what we could achieve. That's given us the impetus to put up our own tents. But as this was happening, people were also turning up saying, I want to camp, but I don't have a tent. And so then we're like, okay, well, maybe we should put some small tents ready for those people. And then more people like that came, and then we just grew like that. And as we got older, our guests, I guess, got older or different or something. And so now we provide the tent.
Yeah, it sounds like people were unknowingly asking for glamping structures without probably knowing what glamping even was. Were you familiar with glamping coming from the UK? Because it is pretty big there, and it's been pretty big there for quite a while, but I'm curious if you had any familiarity with it before you delved into the outdoor hospitality space.
Not really, but remember, I'm fairly old and I've been here for 30 years. So I think it only really took off in the UK about 10 years ago. But I've seen glamping sites now and the beautiful yurts that people are putting up and everything. And there's, as you say, some beautiful ideas. But I think an African tented safari has always been here since the pioneering days when people were literally exploring like Livingstone. So I think the idea of having your bed under canvas in Africa has been here a very long time.
Yeah, I'm personally not a huge fan of the word glamping. I'm a much bigger fan of experiential outdoor hospitality. It's just more of a mouthful, so I can understand when people use the word glamping. hence why I'm trying to come up with I'm trying to get Glamptuary to be a little bit more accepted into the language, because it does really combine a structure that you can stay in with that safe sanctuary experience that really frees you up, I think, to connect with nature, connect with the land. And it sounds like you really put the well-being of animals and nature, and obviously with a zoology degree, you're really taking care to make sure the land is taken care of, and you're working for the land, not so much making the land work for you. And I know you were recently awarded the Fair Trade Tourism certification, which it sounds great. I don't know what it is though, so I'm curious if you can help me understand what that is. And congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. And if I had known what it was before I agreed to do it, I probably wouldn't have done. No, that's not completely true. But it was a surprising amount of work. It's a way of recording all the sustainable things you do already, but you have to sort of record it all and measure things like water usage, electricity, waste, and aim to reduce all of these things as you go along, which is a wonderful aim, because obviously then you're encroaching less and less on the habitat. What it also asks you to do is record all the training you do with staff, record every aspect of your procedures and safety and your legal compliances and everything else. But it was worth it. It will be worth it. And it is, we hope, going to draw more people into following that path and to working to become fair trade certified. It's certainly more sustainable think about what you can do sustainably. It's not just having solar power, which we do have, but it's making sure that you're training staff, that you're empowering them, building their confidence.
Yeah, sustainability it's an ever evolving word. And I think it's often misunderstood. I mean, I think there's some obvious things like nature, but things you've mentioned about taking care of the community, making sure you're creating sustainable structure to continue to grow, to continue to build. And that's really what it sounds like you've done. So kudos to you. That's awesome. So talking about the experiences at Flatdogs, what can a guest kind of expect? I would assume it probably makes more sense to do a longer term stay there. I don't see this being like, oh, I'm going to stay for a night and check it out, right? So you probably have programs or, is it 5 days? Is it 7 days? And then what would be kind of a typical itinerary for somebody?
A lot of people will just come to Flatdogs and spend, say, a week here and not move around too much, have it part of a holiday. Maybe go on to Victoria Falls, because to see one of those amazing waterfalls we're in the same country. Some people do 3 or 4 nights with us because they want to see local projects, because they want to learn more about what's going on in the area and how wildlife's being conserved, how people are being helped with in conservation projects. And then they'll go off to a little bush camp, a bit like the one I originally worked at, which is inside the park, and spend a few more days somewhere like that, which can also be a Glamptuary experience, but just in a nice comparison with ourselves, it gets wilder almost. And a lot of people want to do both, but the experiences inside the national park cost an awful lot more. So it's quite nice for us to work in combination with some of these other camps. Because for a lot of people, it's a one-off trip to Africa. You can't go every week. It's often a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Yeah, well, it sounds awesome that you're partnering with other Glamptuaries and other outfits and experiences. I think as we all can support one another, we can all grow together. And I love that mentality and that approach. Mm-hmm. What kinds of things and tours would I be able to see if I came to Flatdogs? Because, off the top of my head, I would think, okay, I'm going to see elephants. I'm going to see cheetahs. Am I going to see them up close? Am I going to be in a car? Am I going to see them up close and from a car? Like what kinds of things might I expect?
It's an amazing mix here in South Luangwa. We have open vehicles completely. So literally when lion walked past your vehicle, you probably could have touched it, but you're told not to. And it's just you hear, smell, see, and feel it all. When a lion looks you in the eyes, even if you're in the safety of a car, there's nothing quite like it in the world. But we also offer walking safaris. And while it's true, you won't often get that close to lion, because sadly, their instincts are always going to be to move away from humans because we're dangerous. So on foot, everything treads a little bit more warily around you. Whereas in a safari vehicle, you can get as close as you can to anything, really. So it's fascinating for people to really smell an elephant and hear a lion roar right next to them and see a leopard take a kill up a tree. And it is an incredible wildlife experience. But then you have your modern comforts. You've got a beautiful bed. You've got an ensuite loo and shower. You're able to experience it, but without fear or worry or, concern maybe of that you're going to sleep, you're going to just be exhausted because you've been lying on a floor all night. No, there's none of that.
The outdoor hospitality organizations and experiences that seem to be the most well-balanced are the ones that also bring in some of the comforts that are more familiar from maybe traditional resorts. So culinary experiences, perhaps a pool or something like that. And I mean, it does look like you do offer those other creature comforts that maybe make you feel a little bit like home, but also a chance to see some of the culture of Zambia as well, especially with the food.
Exactly. And that's part of the joy of developing training staff or being with staff is, so we'll have a Zambian tasting platter and the chefs will get to cook food that they normally eat at home and all the rest of the relish dishes that go with it, which no one else has ever tried or tasted because you've never been to Zambia or so. And that side of things is always fun. People love trying that. We have got a pool because, our seasons, the best time for watching animals is in the dry season, which is sort of May till end of October. And towards the end of that dry season, temperatures here go up and up and up.
Yeah, it sounds awesome that in the day you can go out and hang out with some lions and cheetahs, and then you can come back and sit by the pool and talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Although nowadays it's also modern. People are posting it back to their friends and showing off the moment they've seen it. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, well, you bring up an interesting point about marketing. I think the organic marketing of people sharing on Instagram is always going to help. But then also, I would imagine a lot of your audience might be coming from outside of Zambia. What is the marketing challenges that you have?
It's mostly access. Access to Zambia is really undeveloped. There are no direct flights from the UK, even. There are no direct flights from anywhere outside of Africa, actually. So we've got to try and get people to us. It's not cheap. So it does cut out a certain level of your market, although there are things like the overland trucks that will drive people through various countries and camping en route and all that. And sometimes people will upgrade off those trips, or they'll see the place on one of those trips and then come back when they've been earning money for a bit longer as such. But it's accessibility. So because Zambia is a relatively poor country, the local people don't fly. Here in Zambia, people will take buses, but our nearest city is 12 hours away by bus. So it's not something you'd encourage tourists to do, because I don't think they'd enjoy it quite so much. And it's a waste of their valuable holiday time, So you have to fly in, but because it's only really tourists that are flying in, there's not enough people to make big airliners. So seats are expensive. So I think that's our biggest challenge. And our government, unfortunately, is not wealthy either. So they have never spent that much on marketing the country as a whole. I'm sure you would have heard of Kenya, because their government's tourism budget or marketing budget for the country is something like $5 million. I think ours is 200,000 maybe. So it's very much harder for us to get the word out.
It's interesting, yeah, that the tourism boards or the governments that are kind of behind the countries really can help to amplify that tourism sector. And then globally, I think this type of travel is definitely growing. It's catching on. It started to really take off, I think, in COVID, when people had to be socially distanced and couldn't do the traditional hotel experience. And so I think that really definitely helped properties like yourself, because people had to think outside the box. When you think about this industry, the experiential outdoor hospitality industry, and you're obviously pioneering and doing a lot of work in sustainability, what do you see happening in the future?
In the 30 years that I've been here, to see the economic growth of the local people here just from tourism, it's incredible. When I first came here, people didn't have houses. They lived in huts with little thatch roofs that they changed before the rains every year. No one had a bicycle, let alone a car. And now some of our staff own cars. They use them to set up their own little businesses, whether it's taxi business or importing goods to sell in the market and things like this. So it's incredible how it's changed.
Yeah, I think travel for good is definitely how I like to look at especially experiential travel, because it's a way for you to check into your vacation. A lot of people use the term, I'm going to check out, and it's totally fine to travel that way. But personally, I much prefer to do your type of travel, where I'm going to learn something. I'm going to experience something. I'm going to be able to hopefully take something away from my vacation that I can bring back into my everyday life and tell my friends about it. And then hopefully, that curates an audience for you that are the same appreciative people that want to go there for the right reasons. What's next for Flatdogs Camp? Like, do you have ideas and things that you want to try in your next 30 years?
Oh my God. I think we're on the right track. I think our aim will be to continue training staff, promoting staff, continue empowering people to know more about tourism, hospitality, maybe take more courses, degrees, whatever they feel they want to do. But I don't think we're going to try and grow anymore. I think we'll just concentrate on providing the best service we can for the best value for people, and not suddenly turn into some 5-star lodge with gold taps and all the rest of it, and rooms so big they're bigger than your house. I don't see the need for that, and I don't think people really need that, or not all people really need that.
I love that answer. There is a point when you should be able to sit back and appreciate what you've built, and then work to sustain in other ways, work to grow in other ways. It's not about, bigger, more money. That's not necessarily the type of growth that's always most healthy. It's about expanding in other ways, I think. And I love how you're approaching things. Well, Jess, thank you so much for joining us on the Glamptuary podcast. You're on my bucket list to come and visit. It sounds like it'll require some effort, but it also sounds like the effort will be well worthwhile.
It's definitely worthwhile, and I can help you get here. Don't you worry.
I know someone. It's good.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jess. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been really, really great talking with you.
I'd like to thank all the viewers and listeners that tuned into this episode of the Glamptuary podcast, and I'd also like to wholeheartedly thank Jessica for taking the time to speak with us today and tell us about her amazing journey and all the wonderful things that she's doing with Flatdogs Camp. If you'd like to take a safari at Flatdogs, the first stop is their website, which is www.flatdogscamp.com. That is www.flatdogscamp.com. And if you'd like to follow along on the Glamptuary podcast, you can do so on our official website, which is www.glamptuary.com. That is www.glamptuary.com. You can also follow the Glamptuary podcast on Apple Podcasts, Pandora Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, and YouTube. We'll see you in the next episode, and until then, namaste.